Thanks, everybody. As Michael said, I'm Arden Thomas. I'm Water Resources Manager for Kittitas County. And today I'm here presenting a project that is really building upon the large project support request that we made last year. I'm going to go through that relationship, understanding that a lot of people involved in this review wasn't involved in that last year's review. I also want to say that Mid-Columbia Fisheries is a co-sponsor with us, and so Katrina is going to be speaking to the elements that are led by Mid-Columbia Fisheries. So advancing forward, first I'm just going to locate the project. It's in what we refer to as the Kittitas reach of the Yakima River. This is a location that's located just south of Ellensburg, Washington. There's a broad alluvial floodplain reach located just upstream of where the river then goes into the Yakima Canyon, and it's confined again. There was some work done like 20 years ago now by Stanford identifying these large alluvial floodplain reaches. We're in the lower half of the Kittitas reach, so that is highlighted in the map with the circle. And then this is an image just of flooding conditions last year. This was not a major flood, but it helps kind of really highlight the potential for floodplain interaction within this reach, which is very exciting. So moving forward.
That's Ringer Loop.
That's Ringer Loop Road for those familiar with the location. So moving forward. Okay, so we're going to have some maps that really kind of show the area of restoration, but again, just kind of providing a little bit more context. As we've seen throughout the Yakima River Basin, this broad alluvial floodplain area was historically confined so that it could primarily be used for agriculture at the time. So here we can see the railroad actually that runs right here. This is a picture of some flooding in 1997 that shows the Hansen pits, just as they were beginning to be mined. And then there's actually, and then you can see the levee system that's being created as part of this project. So kind of just setting the stage again. Historically, the Yakima River was confined by levees, roads, railroads, and that's the really limiting factor in terms of having some of these naturally forming processes that create and sustain fisheries habitat, particularly steelhead.
So I was sharing the slide presentation. Yep. Do that.
Okay. So the project, and then moving on to the next slide. Thanks for doing the hard work back there, Michael. So really what we are doing with this project is building upon some past investments. This work started before the flood control zone district was even formed, because the conservation district was going to step in and hold the grant until we could be formed. It was our first activity as a flood control zone district. We did an assessment of the Yakima River, really from just upstream of this area shown on the map down to the top of the Yakima River Canyon. And really we were looking for opportunities to reduce flood risk and improve salmon habitat. This study, which was funded by Surfboard, really set the stage for the opportunities that we have today. We really identified conservation and acquisition as the highest priority activities within this reach. And from that and subsequently under our discussions, we were able to pick up some key property in county ownership that really enables us to advance this strategy of divesting from infrastructure and really engaging that eastern floodplain for the purposes of, again, improving salmon habitat, and there are also some flood alleviation benefits on the opposite thing. This is something we're very proud of. Since 2015, we have purchased over 500 acres, and this really complements existing public land holdings to really create some opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. And we're coming with a funding request, just keep blazing ahead to implement this good work. What I do want to say is that I'm going to be talking about a restoration planning reach, and that is shown in this map. It really starts as people, well, I don't know, hopefully people online can follow, but we have Hanson Pits here in county ownership. These blocks were recently picked up. I'll be talking about this block in particular, but this is a portion of the project where we're going to be advancing some design work. Okay, moving forward. So we've structured this proposal to identify some tier 1 and some tier 2 activities. The tier 1 activities are directly related to our funding request that we made last year as part of this surfboard large project funding request. And this fills a funding gap that we have associated with commitments we made as part of that proposal. We also have some tier 2 activities, and this seeks to build upon the work that was originally proposed because we have some good opportunities to do so. And Kat will be describing that in some more detail moving forward. Okay, so now I'm finally getting to what our ask is and how it's related to last year's funding request. So as many of you are aware, last year there was a special pot of money that was made available for large surfboard projects. And we saw a real opportunity here in that there was an RV park that came for sale. And we saw a lot of opportunity, especially to advance restoration work by acquiring it. We were worried that this was a very time sensitive opportunity. It's an RV park, it's very expensive. And the large project surfboard request really represented an opportunity to move forward and secure this missing piece. Now, the large project funding request, it was for projects that cost $5 million. We did not need, thankfully, $5 million to secure the RV park. So we scoped our project request for last year's project to really encapsulate $5 million worth of work that was either ongoing or that we knew we needed to do in the next 5 years. And so that really, what I'm going to present to you is not how I would normally scope a project, because it's pulling together some project elements that would be easy to manage separately, but that's the reason why we did what we did. The good news is that we were successful with that large project round, that there was not $5 million available through that round, so we could not get full project funding that was needed, but we did get enough to purchase the RV park. And that property is currently under a purchase and sale agreement. So we are feeling really good about essentially taking on a little bit of risk, honestly, to make this happen. Moving forward. The second thing that we committed to as part of this project was to move forward with design work. Currently, we are engaged in conceptual restoration design work. This is funded by the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan Habitat Subcommittee, and we are getting also free labor from the Bureau of Reclamation. This conceptual design and phasing plan, again, covers this full area, Hanson Pits down through the RV park. That is going to be completed at the end of the year. What we did to be eligible for this larger funding request was we committed to, during the grant period, move forward with preliminary design. And I'm coming to you today because we needed to commit to that design. Doing so makes a lot of sense because we are going to be kind of ready to roll in terms of getting this large project funded and constructed. But we do have a funding need for this preliminary design component. Okay, and then moving forward. And then just kind of speaking a little bit about what we're seeing with the design work and speaking to that for a minute. One thing that I really do want to say is this RV park, it was only after we had been able to do some more recent modeling that we understood how critical the flood risk would increase to that property by removing these levees up here. So we've been able to address a really significant constraint for restoration with that acquisition. But we've done some initial modeling, and what it shows is, as expected, removing the Hanson Pitts levee, which is a county flood control zone district levee, which is currently failing in a private firm, which is now on land that Kittitas County owns, is that we do see a lot of activation of this floodplain. So that's priority number one. We have these pits, and so we're still working out what this is going to look like at the conceptual design level, but it's going to include certainly engaging at least a portion of those pits directly and doing some wetland restoration. Currently, this property is managed right here as a spray field. We're going to reorient that so that we are prioritizing riparian restoration function in the riparian corridor there. I'm excited to do that reorientation because we already have cottonwoods that are trying to grow up there. We have some side channels that are disconnected due to previous irrigation operations, which are no longer needed. So we're going to address that. And then what we're also seeing is that even when we reconnect by addressing the levees, we still have this high dry area, which does not appear to be natural. And so we do, what we're looking at, especially on this BLM property, is doing some significant floodplain grading to really promote that reconnection. So we're still kind of at the very kind of conceptual level stage of kind of identifying what the actions are. But essentially we're going to get through this conceptual design process, figure out how much of all of this we can bite off in our initial phase, and then move that to preliminary design. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so, and then the other thing that we did to just really, again, maintain eligibility is we were able to leverage a lot of the good work that Mid-Columbia Fisheries is already doing to get riparian plantings established within the full restoration area. We've been in close communication so that they're not restoring land that is then going to need to be disturbed for construction purposes, but we had some low-lying fruit, and there was a real opportunity with Washington Conservation. Is that right? Washington Conservation Commission funding this year. So this, we included so that we can include some match and not just have it be a straight up $5 million request. And so what we committed to do is plant 19.5 acres. This has been accomplished, but we have funding need for the stewardship to make sure that those plantings are successful. And so we're asking for this for the tier 1 request. As part of it, we knew that there was 12 acres of recently planted riparian forest. So we proposed stewardship. We still have a funding need for that stewardship. And then we had identified alfalfa field, which due to elevation and some of the previous work Pat has done really stood out as a good opportunity to implement this cottonwood restoration pilot project, which you will be hearing more about. We committed as part of the initial funding request and ask to just do some initial weed treatment, frankly, to keep that field in good shape for that work. We don't need any money as part of our tier 1 request. That's covered, but if there's additional funding that's available, we could move forward with implementation, and we'd like to do so. Next slide. And with that, I'm gonna hand things over to Kat so she can detail our riparian and stewardship act.
So the north end is across from the junkyard.
No, Mill Pond. Yeah, Mill Pond. Mhm.
Thanks, Arden. So as Arden said, I'm Katrina Strathman. I'm a plant ecologist with Mid-Columbia Fisheries, and I'm excited to be a part of this project. It's very exciting and brings a lot of work together. So as Arden said, this project is conceived in terms of tier 1 and tier 2. So I'm going to go through the riparian work that is scoped in this proposal. So tier 1, again, are activities that were scoped under the previous large acquisition surfboard request from last year. And it included 3 early action sites that are in the hatch marks and are described here on the right. So yellow hatch. Those are all private, they're all publicly owned. 1 is BLM and 2 are county owned. And all of those projects occur in the channel migration zone and were identified as early action or early on because we knew that they were in an area that could be in a future channel migration or floodplain connection zone. And we also know that it takes 30 years or more to establish a mature forest. So starting after restoration, after you have channel migration, is sometimes a little late to really see the benefits. So 2 of these sites were planted immediately after the project that Arden described was contracted. So those were the planting that we had planned to be part of that project was already was not eligible for match. Ringer East, which you could actually see in the first aerial image of flooding, is this project here, and we just finished planting 16 acres in that active floodplain yesterday. So that's very exciting. Next slide, please. So we do have stewardship needs at all of these sites, and stewardship for any riparian reforestation project is a really important part of assuring success, both in terms of making sure that those plants are surviving as we wish, but also protecting that investment to date. So if we put the plants in the ground and we spend thousands of dollars doing that, we want to make sure that those plants are actually securing the benefit that we intended. And stewardship can take 1 to 4 years, depending on the site conditions and depending on the method that's used. So in our 3 projects here, some of the stewardship that we're looking at is irrigation. We only need irrigation at 1 site, Spring Creek, which has some conventionally planted plants that were installed in 2021. And then we also have weed management, which essentially reduces competition in the early growth of the plants at all 3 sites, and herbivory control for deer and elk, very active deer and elk at Ringer West and Spring Creek. All of the plants that were recently installed in fall of 22 and last week were installed using a new deep planting method, which is pictured here, and that's where we install tall stemmed plants, placing the rooted material into moist soil using a hydraulic ram that's excavator mounted like this. It can also be done, depending on the soil type, using an auger. There are lots of different ways of doing this, but this is very efficient and really has like some of the least soil disturbance that we've seen. In this site at Ringer East, before the recent flooding started, we had flows that approximated the low end of summer irrigation flows, and we were able to put that plant 3 feet down, so 2 feet down, be at that lower irrigation flow. I think it was about 33,000 CFS, 2,500 CFS. The water was 2 feet down. So the rootstock is going into moist soil. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into more detail, unfortunately, because of time, but I'm happy to answer questions or direct you to the proposal. I wanted to go to the tier 2 reforestation sites as well. And those again are early action sites. They're also within the channel migration zone pictured here with the red circles. They again are introducing riparian forest to areas that would be, we know would be inactivated floodplain in the near future, and or providing floodplain roughness and reduce slowing bank erosion in the case of the site that's on the right bank. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention that we're proposing these sites now as tier 2 because in the event that additional riparian funding is available through Surfboard, which I understand is possibly not going to happen this year, but in the case that it is, we wanted these projects to be queued up and ready to go because of their value in terms of early action projects. So the first project is a side channel on the Yakima River at River Mile 150. It's a privately owned parcel within, as an inholding within the privately owned Atchison Ranch. And McClymont is very excited to engage this private landowner who owns, and the Atchison family that owns a very significant floodplain located ranch, and address some of their first priorities in terms of floodplain erosion. This project is also identified in the Habitat Corridor Plan that, in fact, all of our projects, with the exception of the last one that I'll show you, were identified as early action projects in the Yakima Corridor Plan that Arden mentioned. So this project is a reforestation project along 1,500 feet, and the landowner and the Atchison family have agreed to an up to 200-foot width riparian zone, replanting that riparian zone that's shown in the green on the map. And we have funding to exclude cattle. We also have funding to plant 30 feet wide of that zone from the Department of Ecology and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so our proposal here is requesting a completion of that riparian planting in order to maintain the goodwill of the landowners that we would like to have a long-term restoration partnership with, and also just to for the cost benefit of doing projects in tandem or completing a project and maintaining the stewardship. All of the planting at this project will be done using a hydraulic ram to eliminate the need for irrigation. So what we're looking at here is cattle exclusion and weed management for stewardship. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. The second tier 2 project is a really exciting, innovative technique that we are proposing to create a cottonwood stand over a large area on 17 acres that is county owned. And this project takes advantage of our knowledge of cottonwood recruitment and uses essentially agricultural techniques, common agricultural techniques to extend our planting. Next slide, please. This area is again within the conceptual design area that Arden suggested. So what we're looking at is initiating a stand from seed, and this is not something that we talk about typically, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a planting project where we're putting container plants in the ground. We're using natural processes, but capturing those through using agricultural techniques to mimic some of those processes that are not occurring. Next slide, please. So for some of you, you may recognize the graph on the left which describes the cottonwood recruitment box model. And it's essentially a stylized hydrograph of that shows those pieces of those conditions that are necessary for recruitment. So here we've got this high flood flow that creates bare seed bed. And that's one of the things that cottonwoods need, is a bare seed bed. It also shows that flood flow that wets up the seed bed at the time of seed release, shown by the gray box. And now, because of some work that Mid-Columbia has done in partnership with the Yakima Nation, we now understand, at least in the Kittitas Valley, that seed release, peak seed release, occurs between June 1st and July 15th, depending on the year. So it's widely variable depending on our climate year. And then the third thing that cottonwood really need is a flow recession, where the rate of decline of that recession does not exceed the rate of growth of cottonwood roots. So we're looking for those things. Next slide. Or rather, we'll be creating those conditions using agricultural methods like tilling to create bare soil, and irrigation in terms of a wheel line to flood the field and create moist soil at seed release, and then mimic that flow recession. I gave you some rough estimates because this method has great promise to really allow us to incorporate this type of method into floodplain reconnection or large-scale restoration projects, and also reduce costs. So where we have large areas of bare soil. So I did a rough cost estimate of what our deep planting technique, which is the most effective and efficient technique that is currently available to us. And there's about a 4-fold cost savings by using, and most of that is actually in the irrigation equipment. So if you're reusing the equipment elsewhere, it's even cheaper. But anyway, this is the project that we're really excited about. This has only been done in a handful of states in the West, or a handful of sites, excuse me, in the West, by Chris Hogue, and he's been advising us heavily on the techniques here that we're proposing to use. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Arden, and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions later.
Let's take this opportunity to give like a 5-minute warning because we ran a little bit late coming out of lunch.
Yeah, and I think I just want to add too, so we do anticipate to do some extensive floodplain recontouring and lowering within the study range. In those areas, we have a lot of areas with already an alfalfa field. We're targeting elevations similar to this pilot project field, and are going to need to be reforested, and then we're going to have other swaths that we heavily disturb. So I see a lot of value in moving forward with this pilot study early, because I think it will really help inform kind of, again, I mean, we just have hundreds of acres that we're going to be looking to reforest, and it would be really awesome to nail down this technique. There's already high fish use within the study range. This is a coho that was filmed within it. I think we can answer any questions about fisheries use by, rearing by Chinook, steelhead, coho. There's a Springbrook channel, which is really important for some thermal and flow refugia for these species. And there's already, and there's even more potential for very highly complex stream network, which is really particularly critical for those living fish moving forward. Again, we have a $5 million project. We've already secured around $3 million from the last round of surfboard. We are not coming to you requesting $2 million for our base level request. We're asking for roughly $356,000. Again, this is to complete the scope of what we're already on the hook to do, frankly. So we are eager to get that funded by adding these tier 2 activities that would increase our request by $317,000 roughly. But we really want to emphasize, that we've tried to scale our ask by this tier 1 and tier 2, understanding that there are more significant budget limitations than we would like this year. Okay, moving forward. Briefly, kind of talking about some associated community benefits. We're working very closely with Bureau of Land Management to the restoration activities would also occur on their land. Talking about recreation use, just the acquisition of the RV park is already going to do a ton to make those lands more accessible to community members. There's this concept plan, City to Canyons Trail, and all of this work is just very aligned with having those types of recreational uses, which are flood compatible and compatible with these habitat forming processes. Moving forward. And one other community benefit that I want to speak to is one of our large funders for these acquisitions is Floodplains by Design. And when we worked with them on the floodplain acquisitions for our Stewart and our Moore property, we set aside some land where we can manage flood compatible agricultural uses. So these are properties that are held by the county. We're kind of working to get them in shape to be made available for lease, but I want people to know that this was always intended with these parcels in particular to have that joint use. And that's really kind of the end of our presentations. If there's time for questions.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions from people in the room or online?
So you're gonna have 200 feet. Where's it helping the fish?
Yeah, why don't we go back?
We're taking, ripping up alfalfa fields and gonna get flooded and all the topsoil washed away. We plant cottonwood, but what's that doing for fish?
Yeah, maybe if we could go to, I don't know which, the slide with the first map.
Yeah, just trying to get to advance.
Thank you. Yeah, right, oh, the other one will work. So right now, it does flood, but the really flood interaction is severely limited because we have this levee and berm right here. So and then we have some features that are also disconnecting currently side channels, and it's like an old obsolete head gate. We have roads moving across. So we now have this land secured in public ownership, so we do not need to continue to invest in this infrastructure up here. So this infrastructure is failing. You know, we're seeing more and more flooding, and you're right, without kind of planning and management, we're not doing much that's beneficial for habitat, especially in the short term. So what we're really talking about is, number one, coming up with a game plan, knowing that the end game is to remove these structures and to allow the river to migrate throughout this corridor. And that we're already seeing that creates really excellent habitat in this area. And two, to do those early riparian restoration plantings so that we're not flooding exposed alfalfa fields or, other disturbed fields, but we have, the both the floodwaters and then eventually stream migration entering in these forested habitats.
You mentioned, I think you said you're gonna tear out the hay. And then one of the ways it's gonna get irrigated is by being flooded.
We're not, well, it's gonna be sprinkler applications and then flooding.
Any other questions before we go to the next presentation?
If I may, I know I'm not on the board, but I just want to suggest that mature cottonwood groves take a long time to develop, and the value is not just for fish. This is, I think, includes wildlife in the recovery board title, and they have vast value for wildlife as opposed to an alfalfa field. So I would say that's a pretty good reason in general to pledge up floodplains with riparian vegetation, especially in a spot like this. So that would be something I would think of as a manager and ask that question.
I think the other thing that we're trying to get at with these early actions, riparian sites, if that is what your question is directed to, is that because it takes so long to grow a forest, and that forest provides large wood that contributes to floodplain complexity and channel complexity. We don't want to have new channels developing in an area that is just an agricultural field or annual weeds. We'd like to have perennial forested vegetation there. So as the channel is beginning to migrate, like it did historically, it's migrating into forests like it would have done historically. I don't know if that helped. I'm happy to talk to you at length about your question, if you'd like.
One other possibility, you said there's an area down there that looks like a raised, artificially raised. I wonder if something's buried there. Old cart lines. Might be some old maps and look. It's suspicious.
I just wanted to pass on one comment online, and there's some other ones I'll also be forwarding to you, but Joe just mentioned if Washington Rec, WFC has Yakima River RV Park, I guess, has a purchase and sale agreement. Oh no, Western River Conservancy has a purchases and sale agreement signed with Yakima River Park, who will become the final ownership entity.
That's a good clarification. So, yeah, Western Rivers Conservancy does not buy and hold land. They buy and they transfer it to a public entity, and they're gonna transfer it to the county. We're entering into a separate purchase and sale agreement with Western Rivers. That will all happen back to back. So at closing, the county will take ownership.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then we should move on.
I don't have a question, just a politically incorrect comment. Back when Jack Stanford was doing that work on the Regis study, he was talking to some fish guys, and he said, Kittitas County has the worst floodplain management I've seen in my career, including work in third world countries. You've come a long way since the 1990s.
Oh, it's helpful to hear that. Thank you, Tom.
I really got some bad problems right now.
It only took us having to repair Ringer Loop Road like 10 times for us to figure it out.
Thank you very much.
Just a process thing, especially for new folks. On wildlife, the Citizens Committee has one place where they can score it, and it's really a tiebreaker. But for better or worse, our funds are salmon funds because of all the constraints on the state and federal monies, so.
I will say that the wildlife here is fabulous. There's an elk herd. Being able to manage that elk herd is, important, and having this land for them to do so. And then there's a lot of wild turkeys out there, so it's.
There's a great blue heron rookery on the recent acquisition on the Moore property.
And a surprising number of tree forts with small windows.